The look of utter disbelief on my son Gregory's face when I revealed that the house he'd secretly put me in a nursing home to sell had already been legally transferred to my late husband's foundation will forever be etched in my memory. It was a mixture of shock, anger, and the sudden realization that his carefully orchestrated plan had completely unraveled in a single moment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Evelyn Pearson, and at 76, I never imagined that being told I was no longer capable of living independently would expose which relationships in my life were built on genuine love and which were crafted from calculated financial opportunism. My story isn't just about betrayal. It's about foresight, justice, and how the wisdom of those we've lost sometimes protects us long after they're gone. Before I dive deeper into this journey, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. If this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I'll be sharing something special about reconnecting with family after betrayal that you won't want to miss. This photograph you see on the screen was taken at my 75th birthday celebration just 10 months ago. My son Gregory stands to my left, his wife Natalie beside him, and my daughter-in-law Catherine, my late son David's widow, is on my right. We're all smiling beneath the happy birthday banner in the Victorian home that my husband Walter and I had lovingly restored over 4 decades. It was our forever home, the place where we raised our boys, celebrated countless holidays, and where Walter spent his final days before heart failure took him from us 6 years ago. I thought we were still a close-knit family despite occasional tensions about finances and property. I couldn't have been more wrong. Walter always told me, "Evie, remember that our legacy isn't in our possessions, but in the integrity with which we've lived our lives." Those words became my anchor when I discovered my own son had conspired to declare me incompetent so he could sell the home where his father had taken his last breath. After Walter passed away, my relationship with Gregory began to change in subtle ways. His visits became more frequent but shorter, focusing more on the burden of maintaining my house, rather than how I was coping with the loss of my partner of 52 years. He began suggesting senior living communities within months of his father's funeral, bringing glossy brochures to our Sunday teas. "Mom, this house is just too much for you to handle alone," became his constant refrain, though I'd been managing well with occasional help from my neighbor Beatrice, a retired nurse who had become my closest friend after helping care for Walter in his final months. The first warning sign appeared when Gregory offered to simplify my finances, asking for access to all my accounts and investment portfolios. When I declined, explaining that my financial advisor had everything in perfect order, I noticed a fleeting look of frustration cross his face. Their campaign escalated after I mentioned meeting with Walter's attorney about establishing a charitable foundation in his memory, something we had discussed extensively during his illness. Suddenly, Gregory became intensely interested in the legal arrangements, offering to drive me to meetings, asking to sit in, "Just to make sure you understand everything properly, Mom." What Gregory didn't know was that Walter and I had many conversations during his illness about our concerns regarding our son's financial habits. Gregory had accumulated significant debt from risky investments and an extravagant lifestyle that his income as a real estate developer couldn't sustain. His brother David, who had passed away in a car accident 3 years before Walter's diagnosis, had been the financially responsible one. Walter had structured his estate to provide for me completely, while ensuring certain assets, including our home, would eventually support causes he cared about. The crisis began when Gregory and Natalie proposed what they called a wellness retreat to give me a break from the isolation. They suggested a 2-week stay at a lakeside resort called Willow Creek Lodge that offered rejuvenating activities for seniors. Having spent most of my time alone since Walter died, except for Beatrice's visits and weekly dinners with Gregory's family, I agreed, grateful for what seemed like genuine concern. Beatrice seemed uneasy about the arrangement. It's strange they're insisting on this particular place, she observed as she helped me pack. And why would they need your medical records and financial statements for a vacation? Her questions planted seeds of doubt, but I dismissed them. After all, this was my son, Walter's boy. Surely his intentions were good. The resort turned out to be Willow Creek Senior Living, a long-term care facility with an attached memory care unit. What had been described as check-in procedures was actually an admission process. The luxury suite was a standard room in the assisted living wing with institutional furniture and a shared bathroom. "This is just temporary, Mom," Gregory assured me as a staff member wheeled in my luggage, "while we get some updates done on the house to make it safer for you." 4 days into my retreat, Dr. Morrison appeared for what was described as a routine wellness assessment. The examination focused extensively on cognitive evaluation, questions about the current president, the date, simple memory recall exercises, and basic arithmetic problems. It was a dementia screening protocol that I didn't recognize at the time, having spent my career as a high school principal, not in healthcare. Over the next week, Gregory or Natalie visited daily, each bringing paperwork requiring my signature. Just insurance forms, or standard releases for the home renovations. I signed several documents, though I insisted on keeping copies, a habit from my administrative career that would later prove crucial. It was Beatrice who uncovered the scheme. Concerned by my sudden absence and vague explanations from Gregory about my whereabouts, she went to Victor Alvarez, Walter's attorney, with her suspicions. Together, they discovered that Gregory had initiated guardianship proceedings, claiming I was suffering from cognitive decline. The routine assessment had been arranged to support his petition. The insurance forms included documents giving him power of attorney and authorization to act as my financial representative. Most disturbingly, they discovered through Beatrice's former colleague who worked in real estate that my house, our house, Walter's and mine, had already been listed for sale, with an open house scheduled for the following weekend. When Beatrice finally reached me by phone, claiming to be my sister to get past the front desk screening, the full extent of the betrayal came crashing down on me. "Evelyn," she said without preamble, "Gregory is trying to sell your house. Victor and I have seen the listing online." The crushing weight of this betrayal was almost too much to bear. My own son, the boy Walter and I had raised, whose college education we had funded, whose first home we had helped him purchase, was now attempting to erase me from my life and profit from it. What he didn't know, what Walter had arranged in his final months, was about to completely upend his plans. But as I sat in that sterile room at Willow Creek, processing the magnitude of my son's betrayal, I couldn't yet bring myself to reveal the final piece of information that would stop his scheme in its tracks. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The tension in the sterile hallway of Willow Creek was palpable as I approached the reception desk, with a steadiness in my stride that belied the turmoil inside me. My years as a high school principal had taught me how to project authority even when I felt anything but powerful. "I'd like to check out, please," I stated firmly to the young woman behind the counter. Her name tag read Ashley, and she couldn't have been more than 25, probably working here between college semesters. "Oh, Mrs. Pearson," she replied with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I don't see any discharge orders in your file. Let me check with the administrator." "That won't be necessary," I said, keeping my voice even. I was not admitted here for medical treatment. I was told this was a temporary stay while work was being done on my home. "I am leaving now." Ashley's smile faltered. "I'm afraid I can't authorize that without proper documentation. Your son mentioned you might be confused about the arrangements." The word confused hung in the air between us, the first official indication of how Gregory had characterized me to the staff. I felt a chill run through me as I realized how thoroughly he had laid the groundwork for my indefinite stay. "Am I being held against my will?" I asked, loud enough that several residents in the nearby sitting area turned to look. "Because unless you have court-ordered guardianship documents, I am a mentally competent adult who is free to leave this facility." The directness of my question clearly caught Ashley off guard. She glanced nervously at the other residents who were now watching our exchange with undisguised interest. "I'll need to speak with Mrs. Keller," she said, picking up the phone. While Ashley spoke in hushed tones to the facility administrator, I took a moment to survey my surroundings more critically than I had in the past week. What I had initially accepted as a resort-like environment now revealed itself for what it truly was: an institutional setting dressed up with potted plants and neutral-colored wallpaper. The residents I had politely chatted with over bland meals were not vacationers, but permanent inhabitants, many with the vacant expressions of those heavily medicated or resigned to their fate. Mrs. Keller appeared within minutes, a tall woman, in her 50s with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. "Mrs. Pearson, I understand there's some confusion about your stay with us," she began, gesturing toward a small office off the main hallway. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately?" "There's no confusion on my part," I replied, remaining where I stood. "I was brought here under false pretenses by my son. I am not in need of assisted living, and I am leaving today." Mrs. Keller's professional demeanor didn't waver, but I noticed a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Your son, Gregory, has expressed serious concerns about your ability to live independently," she said, lowering her voice. "He's initiated guardianship proceedings and requested that we provide a safe environment for you until those proceedings are complete." "Has a court granted him guardianship?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Well, no," she admitted. "But the evaluation with Dr. Morrison was conducted without my informed consent or understanding of its purpose," I interrupted. "I was told it was a routine wellness check, not an evaluation of my competence." Mrs. Keller seemed momentarily at a loss for words, which I took as my opportunity to press forward. "I spent 34 years as a high school principal, Mrs. Keller. I am familiar with ethical standards regarding informed consent. Dr. Morrison never disclosed that he was conducting an evaluation that would be used in guardianship proceedings. That alone raises serious questions about the legitimacy of his findings." I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, weighing the risk of allowing me to leave against the potential liability of keeping me against my will without legal authority. "I'll need you to sign a release form acknowledging that you're leaving against medical advice," she finally said. "I'll sign a form acknowledging that I'm leaving," I countered, "but not against medical advice, since I was never here for medical treatment in the first place." After a tense standoff, Mrs. Keller produced a standard release form, which I read carefully before signing. Years of reviewing contracts and disciplinary documentation had taught me never to sign anything without scrutinizing every word. Beatrice was waiting in her silver Honda Civic exactly where she'd promised to be when we spoke on the phone. At 74, she still drove with the confidence of someone decades younger, a skill I was immensely grateful for at that moment. "You got out," she exclaimed as I slid into the passenger seat, my small overnight bag clutched in my hands. I hadn't bothered to retrieve the larger suitcase Gregory had packed for me, containing clothes for what was supposed to be a 2-week stay. "Barely," I replied, the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation beginning to ebb. "They tried to tell me I couldn't leave without Gregory's permission." Beatrice's face darkened with anger. "The nerve. You're not a child or a prisoner." "Not yet," I said grimly. "But if Gregory has his way, I soon will be, legally at least." As we drove away from Willow Creek, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief at escaping the facility, heartbreak over my son's betrayal, and a growing sense of resolve about what needed to be done next. "Victor is meeting us at your house," Beatrice informed me as we turned onto the familiar streets of my neighborhood. "He's bringing all the paperwork from Walter's trust. Says he wants to be there when Gregory shows up. The thought of confronting my son sent a wave of nausea through me. Throughout my career, I'd faced angry parents, defiant students, and difficult school board members, but nothing had prepared me for the prospect of confronting my own child about his attempt to have me declared incompetent for financial gain, We rounded the corner onto Maple Street. My Victorian home came into view, and with it, the red for sale sign prominently displayed in the front yard. Seeing it there, that commercial marker on the home where I'd raised my children, nursed my husband through his final illness, and expected to live out my own days, made the betrayal suddenly, painfully concrete. Beatrice must have noticed my sharp intake of breath. "Victor says the listing is completely unauthorized," she said quickly. "They can't legally sell without your signature on multiple documents." "They were working on getting those at Willow Creek," I replied. "All those papers Gregory and Natalie kept bringing for me to sign." We pulled into my driveway behind a sleek black sedan I recognized as Victor's. The distinguished attorney was standing on my porch, briefcase in hand, his normally jovial face set in serious lines. "Mrs. Pearson," he greeted me formally as I approached. "I'm relieved to see you've been able to return home." Before I could respond, the sound of another car pulling into the driveway drew our attention. Gregory's BMW came to an abrupt stop behind Beatrice's Honda, and my son emerged, his face flushed with what appeared to be a mixture of surprise and anger. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he demanded, striding toward us. Then, noticing Victor, his expression shifted to wariness. "What's going on? Why is Dad's lawyer here?" "I think you know exactly what's going on, Gregory," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "The better question is why there's a for sale sign on my lawn when I never authorized my home to be listed." Gregory's expression flickered, between defiance and calculation before settling on concern, a look I'd seen him perfect over years of explaining away missed deadlines and financial missteps. "Mom, you're confused. We discussed this. The house is too much for you to maintain. Remember? We agreed it was time to downsize." "We discussed no such thing," I corrected him. "You suggested it repeatedly, and I repeatedly declined." "That's why we're concerned," Gregory pressed, his voice softening to the patronizing tone I'd begun to notice more frequently in recent months. "You don't remember our conversations. That's why Dr. Morrison recommended—" "Dr. Morrison conducted an evaluation under false pretenses," I interrupted. "I was never informed that I was being assessed for competency." Gregory's face hardened. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're confused and paranoid. This is why we need to get the guardianship in place, for your own protection." "Protection?" I repeated, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Or is it for the protection of your financial interests?" My son's face flushed darker. "How dare you? After everything I've done for you." "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside," Victor suggested smoothly, gesturing toward the front door. "I believe there are some legal matters that require clarification." The four of us moved into my living room, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I noticed that some furniture had been rearranged, and several of my personal photographs had been removed from the walls, part of the staging process, no doubt. As I sank into my favorite armchair, the one Walter had given me for our 40th anniversary, I felt a curious calm settle over me. The initial shock and pain of Gregory's betrayal was giving way to something else: determination. With Victor and Beatrice beside me, I was no longer alone against my son's machinations, and I had one crucial advantage that Gregory knew nothing about, an advantage Walter had ensured would protect me long after he was gone. The tension in my living room was thick enough to cut with a knife as Gregory paced angrily and Victor calmly arranged several documents on the coffee table. Beatrice had positioned herself protectively near my armchair, her normally gentle expression hardened into something more vigilant. "I don't understand why you've involved Dad's lawyer in what is clearly a family matter," Gregory said, his tone wavering between defensive and condescending. Mom clearly needs more care than she can get living alone in this big house. I'm here in my capacity as Mrs. Pearson's attorney, Victor replied professionally. As well as the executor of your father's estate, both roles are relevant to the current situation. I noticed how Gregory flinched slightly at Victor's formal tone. My son had always been somewhat intimidated by Victor's legal precision, even when Walter was alive. Let me understand the sequence of events, Victor continued, his pen poised over a legal pad. You took your mother to Willow Creek Senior Living under the pretense of it being a vacation resort, had her evaluated by Dr. Morrison without explaining the purpose of the evaluation, initiated guardianship proceedings based on that evaluation, and listed her home for sale, all without her informed consent or knowledge. When laid out so plainly, the calculated nature of Gregory's actions seemed to hang in the air between us. Even he appeared momentarily taken aback by the stark summary. "You're making it sound sinister," he protested. "I was trying to help. Mom can't manage this house anymore. The proceeds from the sale would have paid for her care at Willow Creek. And coincidentally solved your financial problems?" I asked quietly. Gregory's head snapped toward me, his expression darkening. "What are you talking about?" "Beatrice's son works at Meridian Bank," I explained, watching comprehension dawn on his face. "He mentioned to her that you've been trying to secure a large loan against various properties, including this house, properties you don't own." "That's a violation of privacy," Gregory spluttered, his face flushing. "Small towns," Beatrice said with a shrug that conveyed neither apology nor regret. "People talk. Your financial difficulties don't concern me," I told Gregory, surprised by how steady my voice remained despite the turmoil in my heart. "What concerns me is that instead of coming to me directly, you chose to have me declared incompetent. You wouldn't listen to reason," he exclaimed. "Every time I brought up selling this money pit, you shut down the conversation. Something had to be done. Something like having your mother institutionalized so you could sell her home without her consent?" Victor asked mildly, though the steel beneath his polite tone was unmistakable. Gregory turned to him, frustration evident in every line of his body. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The real estate market is collapsing. My investors are demanding returns I can't provide. Natalie's interior design business is struggling, and the private school tuition for the kids is astronomical. So your solution was to solve these problems by selling the home your mother has lived in for over 40 years? Victor pressed. "The house is worth over $2 million in this market," Gregory burst out, his voice rising. "Just sitting here empty most of the time. A massive asset going to waste while I'm facing financial ruin." The naked truth of his priorities hung in the air between us. My home, the place where I'd raised my children, where I'd nursed my husband through his final illness, where I'd built a life of memories, reduced to nothing more than a dollar figure in my son's desperate calculations. "First," I said calmly, "this house is not empty. I live here. Second, it's not going to waste. It's fulfilling exactly the purpose your father and I intended, providing me with a home for my remaining years. And third," Victor added, opening his briefcase and extracting a document bound in a blue cover, "it's not an asset that could have solved your financial problems regardless of your mother's competence." Gregory's eyes narrowed as Victor slid the document across the coffee table toward him. "What is this?" "This," Victor explained with the patience of someone accustomed to explaining legal complexities to lay people, "is the deed to this property. I suggest you pay particular attention to the ownership section." With visible reluctance, Gregory picked up the document and began to scan it. I watched his expression change from irritation to confusion to dawning comprehension. "This can't be right," he muttered, flipping pages with increasing agitation. "The house has been in Mom's name since Dad died." "The house was in Mrs. Pearson's name," Victor corrected him gently. "Past tense. As you can see from the filing date, ownership was transferred to the Walter Pearson Memorial Foundation 3 years ago, with your mother retaining lifetime residency Rights. Gregory's head snapped up, his eyes seeking mine in disbelief. You transferred the house to a foundation? Without telling me? Your father and I arranged the transfer well before his death, I explained, my voice softening slightly at the genuine shock in his expression. The execution date was set for 3 years after his passing. Victor handled all the paperwork, as specified in your father's will. But why? Gregory asked, confusion temporarily replacing his anger. Why would Dad do this? Victor cleared his throat. Your father was concerned about potential financial pressures that might be placed on your mother after his passing. He wanted to ensure that the family home would remain her residence for as long as she wished, regardless of external circumstances. The carefully diplomatic phrasing didn't disguise the underlying truth. Walter had anticipated exactly this scenario, our son seeing the house as an asset to be liquidated rather than his mother's home to be protected. So what you're saying, Gregory said slowly, the implications sinking in, is that even if I had succeeded in having Mom declared incompetent, even if I had gotten power of attorney, I still couldn't have sold this house? Precisely, Victor confirmed. The foundation owns the property, with a board consisting of Mrs. Pearson, myself, and Judge Caroline Hamada, Walter's cousin. Any sale would require unanimous approval from all 3 board members, and the conditions of the trust specifically prohibit sale during your mother's lifetime without her explicit consent. The fight seemed to drain from Gregory all at once. He sank onto the sofa, the blue-bound deed still clutched in his hands, his expression a complex mixture of defeat, embarrassment, and, I hoped, the first stirrings of shame. So, what happens? Now? He asked, his voice smaller than I had heard it since he was a boy confessing to some minor transgression. That, I said firmly, depends on your next actions. Beatrice, who had been silently observing this exchange with the attentiveness of someone watching a critical match, spoke up. I should give you privacy for this family discussion, she offered, moving toward the door. No, I said, reaching for her hand. You've earned the right to be here more than some actual family members. Please stay. Turning back to my son, I took a deep breath and considered my words carefully. The anger and hurt I felt were real and justified, but beneath them lay something more complex, a mother's enduring hope for her child, however flawed he might be. Your father and I spent years discussing how to handle this exact scenario, I told him, my voice steady despite the emotion behind my words. He saw the patterns in your financial behavior long before I was willing to acknowledge them. He wanted to protect me, but he also wanted to protect you from your worst impulses. Protect me by keeping me from my inheritance? Gregory scoffed, though his indignation lacked its earlier force. Protect you from thinking that inheritance was the solution to self-created problems, I corrected. The foundation doesn't just secure my home, Gregory. It establishes conditions for you to receive meaningful financial support, contingent upon demonstrated responsibility. Victor nodded, opening another section of his briefcase. The trust includes provisions for debt resolution, business investment, and education funding, all available under specific conditions involving financial counseling, business plan approval, and supervised distribution of funds. Gregory looked up, surprise evident on his face. Dad built all that into the trust? Your father loved you enough to recognize your weaknesses without rejecting you for having them, I said softly. He created a structure that would provide support without enabling destruction, something I failed to do by trying to protect you from consequences for too many years. The revelation seemed to pierce through Gregory's defensive anger. For a moment, I glimpsed the vulnerable young man beneath the desperate real estate developer, the boy who had always sought shortcuts, who had never quite learned that sustainable success requires patience and integrity. So I could have gotten help with my financial problems by just asking? He asked, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. Without all this? Not just asking, Victor clarified. Participating in the programs established by the trust, financial counseling, business mentorship, structured support rather than blank checks. But yes, you could have received substantial help without resorting to having your mother declared incompetent and institutionalized. The blunt phrasing landed heavily, as I had intended it to. Sometimes healing requires first acknowledging the full extent of the wound. "What will you do now?" Gregory asked, fear finally replacing defensiveness in his expression. "Are you going to press charges?" It was the question I had been asking myself since Beatrice had first revealed his scheme. The betrayal warranted legal consequences. What he had attempted constituted elder abuse, fraud, and possibly other crimes. Part of me wanted him to face the full weight of those consequences. But another part, the part that remembered him as a child, that recognized how his father's financial success had perhaps inadvertently set him up for failure by never requiring true self-reliance, hesitated at the finality of that path. "That depends," I said after a long pause. "I'm prepared to forego legal action under very specific conditions." Victor raised an eyebrow. This part clearly not discussed in our earlier planning. I gave him a small nod, indicating I knew what I was doing. "First, you will immediately engage with the Trust's financial counseling program, not just nominally, but with genuine commitment to changing the patterns that led us here." Gregory didn't protest, which I took as a positive sign. "Second, you will provide meaningful community service at the Elder Rights Legal Clinic downtown. Perhaps some direct exposure to the elderly population you were so ready to consign me to will develop your apparently lacking empathy." He winced, but nodded. "Third, and most importantly, you will participate in family counseling with me. What happened here goes beyond financial schemes. It represents a fundamental breach of trust and family bonds that needs addressing if we're to have any relationship moving forward." I looked my son in the eye, searching for signs of genuine remorse rather than merely being caught and outmaneuvered. What I saw was complex, shame certainly, but also confusion and hurt that suggested his moral compass wasn't entirely broken, just severely miscalibrated. "I don't know if our relationship can be repaired," I admitted honestly. "But your father would have wanted us to try. The question is whether you're willing to do the difficult work that requires." The silence that followed was weighted with decades of family history, recent betrayal, and the uncertain possibility of redemption. For the first time since discovering his scheme, I saw something in Gregory's expression that gave me pause. Not justification or defensive anger, but the dawning recognition of how thoroughly he had violated something precious and potentially irreplaceable. It would be months before I knew whether that recognition was the beginning of genuine change or merely another manipulation. But as Victor gathered his documents and Beatrice squeezed my hand in silent support, I felt a surprising sense of peace amidst the pain. My home was secure, my autonomy was protected, and the wisdom of my late husband had combined to guide me through perhaps the most difficult challenge of my life. "The choice is yours," I told my son as Victor prepared to leave. "But choose quickly. My patience, unlike my legal options, has an expiration date." 3 months after the confrontation in my living room, I sat in Dr. Renee Hoffman's waiting area, mentally preparing for another family counseling session. The polished office, with its calming blue walls and comfortable furniture, had become a familiar setting for the most difficult conversations of my life. Beatrice, who had driven me, as she did every week, squeezed my hand supportively. "How are you feeling about today?" "Cautiously optimistic," I replied, the phrase having become something of a mantra during these months of tentative rebuilding. Gregory had actually called yesterday to confirm the time without being reminded. A small gesture, but significant, from a son who had once orchestrated my involuntary placement in a nursing facility. These incremental changes, a spontaneous phone call, an unsolicited offer of help with yard work, bringing coffee without an agenda beyond spending time together, had begun to accumulate into something that, while not yet trust, was at least movement in that direction. The door to Dr. Hoffman's inner office opened, and she greeted me with her usual warm professionalism. "Evelyn, good to see you. Gregory is already here." I nodded to Beatrice, our established signal that I was okay proceeding alone, and followed Dr. Hoffman into the room where my son waited. Gregory's seating choice told its own story of our evolving dynamics. 3 months ago, he had sat as far from me as the office furniture allowed. Today, he occupied a chair at a more conversational angle, his posture less defensive than it had been in our early sessions. "Before we begin," Dr. Hoffman said once I was seated, "I'd like to acknowledge that today marks 3 months since you started this process. That's a significant milestone in family reconciliation work." Gregory shifted uncomfortably in his chair, still finding these sessions challenging despite his consistent attendance. "Evelyn, would you like to open by sharing your reflections on these 3 months?" Dr. Hoffman prompted. I took a moment to organize my thoughts, aware that my words carried significant weight in this delicate rebuilding process. 3 months ago, I discovered my son had conspired to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized for financial gain. I began directly, using the clear language Dr. Hoffman had encouraged rather than softening the reality of what had happened. Today, I'm sitting in a room with him voluntarily, which represents progress I wasn't certain was possible. Gregory studied the carpet, his jaw tight with what I had come to recognize as shame rather than defensiveness. "I've seen efforts from you," I continued, looking directly at him. "Your work at the Elder Rights Legal Clinic has changed something in your perspective. The reports from your financial counselor showed genuine engagement rather than just checking a box. These weren't easy commitments to make or keep." "It's the least I could do," Gregory said quietly. "After what I tried to—" He stopped, still, struggling with directly naming his actions. "After I betrayed your trust and tried to sell your home," he finished finally, the blunt acknowledgement representing months of difficult therapy work. Early sessions had been filled with justifications and minimizations. "I was just trying to help you. You would have been taken care of. The house was going to waste." Dr. Hoffman nodded approvingly at Gregory's straightforward statement. "That kind of direct accountability is important. How does it feel, Gregory, to name the action so clearly?" "Awful," he admitted, "but necessary. I can't change something I won't even acknowledge doing." This marked significant progress from the angry, defensive man who had first entered therapy under duress, viewing it merely as a way to avoid legal consequences. "I'd like to discuss something specific today," I said, redirecting the conversation to a topic I'd been contemplating for weeks. "I want to talk about your father's foresight and what that means for our family moving forward." Gregory straightened slightly, his father's memory still evoking complicated emotions. Walter had been gone for 6 years, but his protective measures had proven just how well he had understood the family dynamics. "Dad knew exactly what would happen," Gregory observed with a hint of bitterness. "He predicted I would try to sell the house out from under you." "He understood patterns," I corrected gently. "Your father watched you struggle with financial management. From your teenage years onward, he saw your business ventures collapse from overexpansion and poor planning, rather than becoming defensive as he once would have." Gregory listened with reluctant acknowledgement. "But what I've come to appreciate," I continued, "is that he created the trust not just to protect me, but as a safety net for you as well. He could have simply written you out of his will or left everything to charity. Instead, he built a structure that would force the growth he knew you needed." Dr. Hoffman leaned forward slightly. "That's an interesting perspective, Evelyn. You're suggesting Walter's arrangements were actually an act of care rather than just control." "Exactly," I nodded. "Which is why I've made a decision about the next phase of our relationship and the trust's implementation." The tension in the room shifted, Gregory visibly bracing himself for what might be coming. "Victor has confirmed that you have fully complied with the financial counseling requirements for these past 3 months. Your debt management plan has been approved by the trust committee." His surprise was evident. He hadn't known his participation was being formally evaluated against the trust's requirements. This means, I continued, that as of next month, the trust can begin dispersing the first phase of structured financial support, including the debt consolidation funds you've been working toward. The shock on his face might have been comical. In another context, he had been so focused on meeting my conditions to avoid legal consequences that he hadn't realized he was simultaneously qualifying for the trust benefits his father had established. "You're actually going to release funds to me?" Gregory asked incredulously. "After what I did?" "I'm not releasing anything," I clarified. "The trust is functioning exactly as your father designed it. You've met the qualifying conditions through your own efforts. My personal forgiveness and the trust's financial structures are separate matters, though not unrelated." Gregory wiped at his eyes. "I don't deserve this." "Perhaps not," I acknowledged honestly. "But deserving isn't always the point of family. Your father believed in second chances coupled with safeguards. The funds come with continuing oversight and specific usage requirements." Dr. Hoffman observed our interaction with clinical interest. "Evelyn, this appears to be a significant step in your personal journey. Can you speak to how you arrived at this point?" I considered the question carefully, aware that my son was listening, intently for insights into my thought process. "Three things have guided me," I replied after a moment. "First, my husband's wisdom that our legacy isn't in our possessions, but in the integrity with which we live our lives. I've watched Gregory begin the difficult work of rebuilding his integrity through consistent actions, not just words." Gregory swallowed hard, the reference to integrity clearly resonating. "Second, I've thought deeply about what Walter would want. He created a system of consequences coupled with opportunity, not punishment for its own sake, but accountability with purpose. And third," Dr. Hoffman prompted when I paused, "third, I've recognized that holding on to anger, however justified, would ultimately diminish my life more than it would impact Gregory's. I'm not interested in punishment that serves no constructive purpose." Gregory leaned forward. "Does this mean you forgive me?" The directness of his question took me by surprise. Throughout his childhood, he had always been the one to seek quick resolution to conflicts, uncomfortable with lingering tension. "Forgiveness isn't a single moment," I said carefully. "It's a process. I'm choosing to move in that direction rather than its opposite. But trust and forgiveness aren't the same thing. Trust will take much longer to rebuild if it ever fully can be." Dr. Hoffman nodded approvingly at the nuanced response. "That's a very healthy distinction to make, Evelyn." The remainder of the session focused on practical next steps, continuing our weekly counseling, establishing clearer boundaries for our rebuilding relationship, and discussing how the trust disbursements would function in practical terms. As we prepared to leave, Gregory asked a question that revealed just how much he was still processing the consequences of his actions. "Mom, do you ever think about what would have happened if Dad hadn't set up the trust? If you hadn't had Victor and Beatrice to help you?" The question sent a chill through me, forcing me to confront the vulnerability that all older adults face, particularly those without financial resources or strong support networks. "I think about it every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon," I replied. His confusion was evident until I explained, "Those are the days I now volunteer at Willow Creek, working with residents who weren't as fortunate as I was, people who really were placed there by family members who saw them as burdens rather than people." The shock on his face confirmed he hadn't known about this newest addition to my weekly routine. "You volunteer at the facility where I tried to—" Gregory couldn't even complete the sentence. "Life offers strange symmetry sometimes," I acknowledged. "Many of the residents there have stories similar to what mine could have been. The difference is they didn't have a Walter who anticipated problems, or a Beatrice who recognized warning signs, or a Victor who knew how to navigate the legal system." "How can you stand to go there?" he asked, visibly disturbed by the thought. Because those people deserve advocacy and connection, I explained simply. And because it reminds me of an important truth. What happened in our family isn't rare or exceptional. It's happening to elderly parents every day, many without the resources to protect themselves. We parted in the parking lot with our newly established ritual, a brief hug that acknowledged our biological connection without pretending our relationship had returned to normal. As he walked to his car, I saw Beatrice waiting in hers nearby, her presence a reminder of the authentic friendship that had proven more reliable than family ties in my moment of crisis. "How did it go?" she asked as I settled into the passenger seat. "Another step forward," I replied. Small but real. As we drove away from Dr. Hoffman's office, I found myself reflecting on the past 3 months. The painful conversations, the gradual shifts in understanding, the tentative rebuilding of connections I had once thought permanently destroyed. The house that had become the center of so much conflict remained my home, secured by Walter's foresight and my own determination not to be erased from my life story. "Penny for your thoughts," Beatrice said, interrupting my musings as we stopped. "At a traffic light." "I was just thinking about transformation," I replied. "Not just Gregory's, but my own." "Your own?" Beatrice asked, glancing at me curiously before returning her attention to the road. "You weren't the one who needed to change, Evelyn." I smiled at her steadfast loyalty. "Everyone needs to change, one way or another. I've had to transform from a betrayed mother seeking justice to someone trying to understand the larger patterns at work. Gregory's actions didn't happen in a vacuum. They were part of a system I helped create. Don't you dare blame yourself," Beatrice said firmly as she turned onto Maple Street. "You didn't make him try to sell your house out from under you." "No," I acknowledged. "But Walter and I did raise him with certain expectations. We shielded him from consequences more than we should have. We emphasized achievement over integrity in ways I'm only now beginning to recognize." We pulled into my driveway, the Victorian house that had nearly been sold from under me now standing before us, its gabled roof and wraparound porch as welcoming as they had been for the past 40 years. The for sale sign was long gone, removed the day after our confrontation with Gregory. "Well, I still think you're being too generous," Beatrice said as she turned off the engine. "But that's always been your way. It's why the students at Westlake High adored you, even when you were disciplining them." Her comparison made me smile. "There are similarities between teenagers and adult children, I suppose. Both need boundaries coupled with belief in their capacity to grow." Inside, I settled, at my kitchen table with the tea Beatrice insisted on making before she headed home to her book club meeting. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows Walter and I had replaced during our 3rd year of marriage, casting warm patterns across the oak table where our family had shared countless meals. My phone chimed with a text from Catherine, my daughter-in-law. "Dinner this Sunday? The kids are asking about their grandma." A simple invitation, but one that represented another small step in rebuilding family connections that had been strained by Gregory's actions. Catherine had been horrified when she learned what had happened, her loyalty divided between her husband and the mother-in-law who had welcomed her into the family after David's death. I texted back a quick acceptance, grateful that my relationship with Catherine and my grandchildren hadn't been permanently damaged by Gregory's scheme. They had been innocent bystanders in the whole affair, and maintaining those bonds had been a priority for me throughout the healing process. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the leaded glass panels, I could see Victor's distinctive silhouette on my porch. This was unexpected. Our next scheduled meeting about the trust wasn't until next week. "Victor," I greeted him warmly as I opened the door. "This is a surprise." "A good one, I hope," he replied, his usually formal demeanor softened by what appeared to be genuine excitement. "I have news that couldn't wait until our regular meeting." I ushered him into the living room, noting the manila folder tucked under his arm, a sure sign of legal developments. "Is everything all right with the trust?" I asked, a flicker of concern rising despite his positive energy. The trust is perfectly fine, he assured me, taking a seat in the armchair across from me. Better than fine, actually. Do you remember the educational grant program Walter wanted to establish as part of the foundation? I nodded. It had been one of Walter's passions during his final years, creating scholarships for first-generation college students pursuing careers in the humanities, a field he felt was increasingly undervalued in our technology-focused world. The application we submitted to have it matched by the Harrington Foundation has been approved, Victor announced, his usual professional reserve giving way to genuine enthusiasm. They're going to match our endowment dollar for dollar, effectively, doubling the number of students we can support each year. That's wonderful, I exclaimed, feeling a surge of joy at the thought of Walter's vision expanding beyond what we had initially hoped. When will it start? Next academic year, Victor replied, opening the folder to show me the official letter. We'll be able to support 20 students instead of the 10 we had originally planned. The first Walter Pearson Memorial Scholars will begin their studies in September. As I scanned the letter, with its formal language confirming the matching grant, I felt Walter's presence more strongly than I had in months. This was exactly what he had hoped for. A legacy that extended beyond our family to touch the lives of young people who reminded him of himself. A first-generation college student who had worked his way through university waiting tables and shelving books in the campus library. There's more, Victor continued, handing me another document from his folder. In light of your experience with Gregory and the revelations about similar situations facing other seniors, the Foundation Board voted unanimously to expand our mission to include elder advocacy. The document outlined a new initiative, tentatively named the Dignity and Autonomy Program, aimed at providing legal support, education, and advocacy for older adults facing exploitation or coerced guardianship. This is unexpected, I said, scanning the proposal with growing interest. Judge Hamada was particularly supportive, Victor explained, referring to Walter's cousin who served as the third trustee. She's seen too many cases of questionable guardianship proceedings in her courtroom. When I mentioned what happened with you and Gregory, she immediately suggested redirecting some of the Foundation's resources toward addressing this issue systematically. The proposal was still in its early stages, but the framework was compelling. Legal clinics offering free consultations to seniors, educational workshops about advanced directives and estate planning, and advocacy for stronger protections within the guardianship system. What do you think? Victor asked after giving me time to review the document. It would shift the Foundation's focus somewhat from what Walter originally envisioned, but we all felt he would approve given the circumstances. I looked up from the proposal, feeling a complex mix of emotions. I think Walter would more than approve. I think he would see it as a natural evolution of his intentions. Victor nodded, seemingly relieved by my positive response. There's one more thing, he said, his tone becoming more hesitant. The board thought, and I agree, that you would be the ideal person to spearhead this new initiative. Me? I asked, genuinely surprised. I'm not a lawyer or a social worker. No, Victor agreed, but you're a respected former educator with administrative experience, someone who has personally navigated these waters, and most importantly, someone with the moral clarity to distinguish between protection and control, a line that gets blurred too often in elder care. The proposal called for me to serve as the program's director, working closely with a small staff of legal and social work professionals to develop and implement its services. It would be a part-time position, tailored to my energy levels and interests, but with real responsibility and purpose. I hadn't imagined taking on something like this at 76, I admitted, though I could already feel a spark of interest kindling within me. Age is precisely what qualifies you, Victor pointed out with a small smile. Who better to advocate for elder autonomy than someone who has successfully defended her own? After Victor left, promising to give me time to consider the proposal, without pressure, I took my tea to the back garden, The roses Walter and I had planted together were in full bloom, their scent filling the air as I settled onto the wrought iron bench beneath the maple tree. The idea of channeling my painful experience into something constructive for others was appealing. Throughout my career as an educator, I had always sought to transform challenges into opportunities for growth, for my students, my staff, and myself. Why should retirement be any different? I thought of the residents I'd met during my volunteer work at Willow Creek, people with rich histories and valuable perspectives who found themselves suddenly infantilized, their decisions questioned, their autonomy undermined. Many had adult children who genuinely believed they were acting in their parents' best interests, never stopping to question whether best interests should be defined by the parent or the child. The irony wasn't lost on me that Gregory's attempt to erase my independence might lead to a new chapter of purpose that could benefit countless others facing similar situations. Life's strange symmetry indeed. As the evening light filtered through the maple leaves, I realized I had already made my decision. Tomorrow, I would call Victor and accept the position. At 76, I was about to begin a new career as an advocate for elder rights, not despite what had happened with Gregory, but because of it. Sometimes, I reflected, our deepest wounds become our most powerful sources of purpose when we allow them to connect us to the similar suffering of others. Walter had always understood this. Now it was my turn to live it. The soft chime of my phone interrupted my thoughts. A text from Gregory. Meeting with the financial counselor went well today. He says the debt restructuring plan is on track. Thank you for giving me this chance. Another small step forward in our complex journey of repair. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but movement in that direction, for both of us. 6 months had passed since that pivotal moment in Dr. Hoffman's office, and my life had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated when Gregory first took me to Willow Creek under false pretenses. The Dignity and Autonomy program was now fully operational, with a modest office space downtown that hummed with purpose and activity 3 days a week. I stood before a group of 23 seniors at the Riverdale Community Center, midway through our monthly Know Your Rights workshop. These sessions had quickly become the most rewarding part of my new role. Remember, I emphasized, making eye contact with each attentive face. An advance directive isn't just about end-of-life care. It's about ensuring your voice is heard even when others might try to silence it. A woman in the front row, Marjorie, a retired librarian who had attended every workshop since we began, raised her hand. But what if your family ignores it? My daughter keeps telling me she knows what's best for me, regardless of what I've written down. Her question cut straight to the heart of what had brought me here. I stepped away from the podium and moved closer to the group, preferring the intimacy of conversation over the formality of a lecture. Legal documents are powerful tools, but they're most effective when combined with open communication and support networks, I explained. That's why we recommend having conversations with your family about your wishes while simultaneously building connections outside your immediate family circle. Julian Martinez, the young attorney who had joined our program straight from law school with a passionate interest in elder rights, stepped forward to elaborate. Mrs. Pearson is highlighting something crucial: redundancy in your support system. If your daughter is your only emergency contact, your only designated agent, and the only person who knows your wishes, that creates vulnerability. I nodded, appreciating his articulation of what I had learned through painful experience. This is why next month's workshop focuses on building your personal advocacy team, identifying friends, neighbors, distant relatives, and community resources, who can serve as checks and balances within your support system. After the workshop, as Julian and I gathered our materials, Marjorie approached me privately. Your story, about your son and what he tried to do, has been circulating among us seniors, she said quietly. I hope you don't mind that we talk about it. It's given many of us courage to have difficult conversations with our own children. I felt a complicated mixture of emotions at her words. discomfort at being the subject of community discussion, but satisfaction that my experience was, serving a greater purpose. "I don't mind," I assured her. "Though I should clarify that my son and I are working toward reconciliation. His actions were wrong, but our story isn't over." Marjorie nodded thoughtfully. "That's important for people to understand, too. These situations aren't black and white. We can protect ourselves without permanently severing family bonds." On the drive back to the office, Julian's curiosity got the better of his professional reserve. "Speaking of your son, how are things progressing there, if you don't mind my asking?" I smiled at his careful phrasing. Despite being only 26, Julian showed remarkable sensitivity to the complex emotional terrain we navigated in our work. "It's a work in progress," I replied honestly. "Gregory completed the initial financial counseling program last month. He's adhering to the debt management plan, and he's continued our weekly family sessions even though the mandatory period ended." "That sounds promising," Julian observed. "It is," I agreed, "but trust rebuilds slowly. Last week, he asked to borrow my car while his was in the shop, and I realized I was immediately looking for ulterior motives. Old wounds heal gradually." Julian nodded thoughtfully. "In law school, one of my professors said that rebuilding trust is like restoring an old house. It takes longer than destroying it, requires more skill, and the work is never really finished." His metaphor struck me as particularly apt given how central my Victorian home had been to the conflict with Gregory. "Your professor was wise. Though I'd add that the restoration is worthwhile, even if the result is never quite the same as the original structure." At the office, I found Catherine waiting in the small reception area, her expression a mixture of determination and anxiety. My daughter-in-law's presence was unexpected. We had settled into a comfortable routine of Sunday dinners with her and the children, but she rarely sought me out independently. "Catherine," I greeted her warmly. "This is a surprise." "I should have called first," she apologized, rising from her chair. "But I wasn't sure I'd follow through if I gave myself time to reconsider." Intrigued, I invited her into my private office, really just a converted storage room with a desk and 2 comfortable chairs, but it offered the privacy our conversation clearly required. "Is everything all right?" I asked once we were seated. The children are fine," she assured me quickly. "This is about Gregory and me, and some decisions we've been discussing." The tension in her posture and the careful way she chose her words sent a familiar ripple of concern through me. After the events of the past year, I had become hypervigilant to signs of potential family disruption. "We've decided to sell our house," Catherine continued, watching my reaction closely. "The financial counselor thinks downsizing would help Gregory implement his debt reduction plan more effectively. But after what happened with you, I wanted to speak with you directly before we moved forward." The knot of anxiety in my chest loosened. This was consideration, not another crisis. Catherine was demonstrating the very open communication our program advocated. Direct conversation about significant decisions that might trigger painful associations. "That's thoughtful of you," I said sincerely. "How does Gregory feel about selling?" "Resistant at first," Catherine admitted. "He's worried about how it might look, confirming that he's in financial trouble, seeming like a failure. But he's coming around to the practical benefits." I nodded, recognizing Gregory's lifelong concern with appearances and status. "And how do you feel about it?" Catherine's expression softened. "Relieved, actually. The house has always been too big, too expensive, too much about impressing other people. I'd prefer something more modest, closer to your place so the kids can visit more easily." Her candor touched me. In the aftermath of Gregory's scheme, Catherine had maintained a careful neutrality, supporting me while not abandoning her husband, prioritizing the children's continued relationship with both of us. This direct conversation represented a new level of trust between us. "I appreciate you telling me this yourself," I told her. "And I think it's a sound decision for what that's worth." Catherine's shoulders relaxed visibly. It's worth a lot, actually. Gregory is worried it might seem like he's following through on selling property to solve financial problems, that it might remind you of what he tried to do. There's a world of difference between selling your own home as part of a responsible financial plan and trying to sell someone else's home against their will, I pointed out. Gregory's concern shows he understands the gravity of what he attempted, which is significant progress in itself. After Catherine left, I found myself contemplating the long, winding path of healing that my family had embarked upon. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined sitting calmly in my office discussing real estate decisions with my daughter-in-law, the mere topic a potential trigger for painful memories. Yet here we were, finding our way forward step by careful step. That Sunday, I found myself standing in my kitchen preparing a roast chicken for dinner. A simple meal, but one that had been a family tradition for as long as I could remember. Catherine and the children would be arriving soon for our weekly gathering, but today Gregory would be joining us as well, the first time in nearly 9 months that we would all be together in my home for a meal. The significance of this ordinary family dinner wasn't lost on me. We had shared countless meals in this kitchen over decades, but this one represented a milestone in our healing process. Dr. Hoffman had suggested it during our last family session, carefully gauging whether I was ready to have Gregory back in my home in this intimate context. I think it would be an important step, she had said, looking between us. Evelyn, you've mentioned feeling that your home was violated by Gregory's actions. Reclaiming that space together could be healing for both of you. I had agreed, though not without reservation. As I prepared the familiar recipe, Walter's favorite, I found myself caught between memories of the past and awareness of our fragile present circumstances. The doorbell rang at precisely 5 o'clock. Catherine was always punctual, a trait I had appreciated in her from the beginning of her relationship with my late son David. Through my kitchen window, I could see her shepherding 11-year-old Emma and 8-year-old James up the walkway, Gregory trailing slightly behind them carrying a bouquet and what appeared to be a dessert box. "We're here, Grandma!" James called out as I opened the door, launching himself at me with his customary enthusiasm. Emma followed with a more restrained hug, having recently decided that at 11 she was too grown up for exuberant displays of affection. "Something smells amazing," Catherine said, kissing my cheek as she entered. She looked well, more relaxed than I had seen her in months, perhaps reflecting the progress in their financial situation since deciding to sell their oversized home. Gregory stood awkwardly on the threshold, clutching his offerings like a first-time dinner guest rather than a son in his childhood home. "Mom," he said simply, uncertainty in his voice. "Come in, Gregory," I replied, stepping aside to let him enter. "It's good to have you here." The momentary tension dissolved as James grabbed his uncle's hand. "Uncle Greg, can we show you the fort we built in the backyard? Grandma let us use the old sheets from the linen closet." Gregory's relief at this diversion was palpable. "Absolutely, buddy. Lead the way." As the children pulled Gregory toward the back door, Catherine gave me a supportive smile. "They've been excited all day about having everyone here." James made a special place card for Greg's seat at the table. While Catherine helped me finish dinner preparations, we watched through the window as Gregory examined the elaborate fort, constructed between 2 maple trees in the backyard. He was on his knees now, apparently following James's instructions to reinforce one of the walls. "He's trying, Evelyn," Catherine said quietly. "I know it's complicated, but I see real change in him." "I do too," I acknowledged. "It's not perfect, and I don't think our relationship will ever be what it was before. But it's becoming something new that might eventually be healthy in its own way." Dinner proceeded more smoothly than I had anticipated. The children's presence provided natural buffers against awkward silences, their chatter filling the spaces where adult conversation faltered. Gregory was attentive but subdued, carefully avoiding any mentions of the house or finances, topics that had dominated our counseling sessions but felt too loaded for this tentative family reunion. It wasn't until after dessert, when Catherine had taken the children into the living room to play a board game, that Gregory and I found ourselves alone at the kitchen table. "I brought something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and withdrawing an envelope. "Catherine thought it might be too soon, but I wanted you to have this." With some trepidation, I opened the envelope to find a check for a substantial amount. Not astronomical, but significant. "What is this for?" I asked, confused by the gesture. "Restitution," Gregory replied, meeting my eyes directly. "It's the commission I would have made from selling this house. I know it doesn't undo anything, but my financial counselor suggested it might be a concrete way to acknowledge the harm I tried to cause." I looked at the check, understanding its symbolic importance but feeling conflicted about accepting it. "Gregory, I don't need this money." "I know," he said quickly, "but I need to give it. Not for forgiveness or to clear my conscience, but because it represents profit I was willing to make at your expense. I can't keep it." After a moment's consideration, I folded the check and returned it to the envelope. "I appreciate the gesture and what it represents. If you're serious about restitution, I suggest you donate this amount to the Elder Advocacy Program at Walters Foundation. It would be fitting to have it directly support others who might face situations similar to mine." Gregory nodded, relief, and something like respect crossing his features. "That makes sense. I'll arrange it tomorrow." A comfortable silence settled between us. Not the easy companionship we had once shared, but not the strained tension of recent months either. Through the doorway, we could hear Emma's triumphant declaration that she had won the game, followed by James's good-natured protests. "Do you remember family game nights when you and David were boys?" I asked, the memory surfacing unexpectedly. A genuine smile softened Gregory's features. "Dad was ruthless at Monopoly. David and I never stood a chance." "He taught you both valuable lessons through those games," I observed. "David learned persistence. He never gave up even when bankruptcy seemed inevitable. And you learned creative negotiation. You could talk your way out of paying rent almost every time." Gregory's smile faded slightly. Different life skills. David served him better in the long run. The comparison between brothers had always been complicated. David, responsible and steady, had followed Walter into engineering before his untimely death in the car accident. Gregory, charismatic but impulsive, had pursued riskier paths with mixed success. "Different, not better or worse," I corrected, gently. "Your father and I were always proud of both your strengths. We just worried about how you implemented yours sometimes." Gregory absently traced a pattern on the tablecloth, another gesture so familiar from his childhood that it created a strange temporal dissonance, the middle-aged man before me momentarily overlaid with the image of the boy he had been. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad during this whole process," he admitted. "About why he set up the trust the way he did. At first, I was angry that he didn't trust me, but now I see it differently. He understood me better than I understood myself." Before I could respond, Catherine appeared in the doorway. "We should probably head home soon. James has school tomorrow, and Emma has that science project to finish." The moment between Gregory and me dissolved, but something had shifted subtly. As the children hugged me goodbye and Catherine gathered their belongings, I noticed Gregory, looking around the kitchen with new awareness, taking in the familiar surroundings not with the calculating eye of someone assessing property value, but with the gaze of someone recognizing the true worth of a family home. "Thank you for dinner, Mom," he said as they prepared to leave. "It meant a lot to be here." I squeezed his hand briefly. "Sunday dinners are a standing invitation now. You're welcome to join us whenever you feel comfortable doing so." After they left, I moved through the house, turning off lights and tidying up, feeling the presence of memories in every room. Walter's laughter echoing from the study, David's teenage footsteps pounding up the stairs. Gregory's childhood toys scattered across the living room carpet. The house had witnessed our family's complete story: joy and grief, growth and loss, betrayal and cautious rebuilding. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message from Beatrice. "How did it go?" I smiled at her concern, grateful, once again, for the friendship that had proven stronger than some family ties. "Better than expected," I replied. Another small step forward 1 year to the day after I had escaped from Willow Creek Senior Living, I stood at the podium in the SAI Westlake Community Center Auditorium, facing an audience of over 200 people. The turnout for the first annual Dignity and Autonomy Conference had exceeded even Victor's optimistic projections, with attendees ranging from seniors and their adult children to social workers, healthcare providers, and legal professionals. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in my stomach. After decades as a high school principal, public speaking had never intimidated me. But the personal nature of today's topic made this different. My name is Evelyn Pearson, and 1 year ago today, I discovered that my son had initiated proceedings to have me declared incompetent and placed in a nursing facility permanently, all to gain control of my home and financial assets. A murmur rippled through the audience. Though my story had become well known in our community and somewhat of a rallying point for our advocacy work, hearing it stated so plainly still provoked strong reactions. "I'm not sharing this to vilify my son," I continued, glancing briefly toward the back of the room where Gregory sat beside Catherine, his presence both surprising and meaningful. "I'm sharing it because my experience, while painful, is far from unique. The difference is that I had resources many seniors lack: legal knowledge through my late husband's attorney, financial protection through a carefully structured trust, and a dedicated friend who recognized warning signs and took action." From my position on the stage, I could see Beatrice in the front row, nodding encouragingly. At 75, she had become as passionate about elder advocacy as I was, volunteering weekly at our office and facilitating support groups for seniors navigating family conflicts. Today, you'll hear from experts in elder law, geriatric medicine, financial protection, and mental health, I explained, gesturing to the panel of professionals seated to my right. But equally importantly, you'll hear directly from seniors who have faced exploitation, coercion, or the subtle erosion of their autonomy by well-meaning but misguided family members. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the diverse audience. Because that's the complexity we must acknowledge. Many cases of elder exploitation occur not through malicious intent, but through misunderstanding, fear, and the delicate power dynamics that emerge as parents age and children assume more caregiving responsibilities. The morning proceeded with a series of presentations that illuminated different aspects of elder rights and protection. Judge Hamada, Walter's cousin who had been instrumental in expanding our foundation's mission, spoke compellingly about the problems she had observed in guardianship proceedings throughout her judicial career. "The system was designed with good intentions," she explained, "to protect vulnerable individuals. But it has evolved into something that can too easily be weaponized to strip seniors of their fundamental rights with minimal due process." Dr. Melissa Chen, a geriatrician who had joined our initiative after hearing about my experience, addressed the medical aspects of capacity assessments. "Cognitive evaluation is not a pass-fail test," she emphasized. "Capacity exists on a spectrum and varies by task. A person might need support managing complex finances, but remain perfectly capable of deciding where and how they want to live." During the lunch break, I moved through the community center atrium, where various organizations had set up information tables. Julian Martinez was deep in conversation with an elderly man and his middle-aged daughter at our foundation's booth, likely explaining the free legal clinics we now offered twice monthly. "Mrs. Pearson?" a voice called from behind me. I turned to find Willow Creek's administrator, Mrs. Keller, approaching with a tentative smile. I wanted to thank you for inviting our staff to attend today. Her presence was unexpected. When our foundation had sent invitations to various senior living facilities in the area, I hadn't personally expected Willow Creek to accept. Thank you for coming, I replied, genuinely pleased by this development. It's important to have residential care providers as part of this conversation. Mrs. Keller nodded, her professional composure intact, but with a new hint of humility. Your case prompted us to reevaluate many of our admission protocols. We've implemented new training for our intake staff about recognizing potential coercion and verifying that residents truly consent to placement. This was precisely the kind of systemic change our program hoped to inspire, not merely helping individuals navigate exploitation, but preventing such situations from occurring in the first place. That's excellent news, I told her. Perhaps you'd consider sharing those protocol changes at next year's conference? Other facilities could benefit from your experience. As Mrs. Keller moved away with a promise to consider it, I noticed Gregory making his way toward me through the crowded atrium. His attendance today had been unexpected. I had mentioned the conference during our now regular Sunday dinners, but hadn't specifically invited or pressed him to come. This is quite a turnout, he said as he reached me, surveying the bustling room. You've built something significant here, Mom. We have, I corrected gently. This is Walter's foundation, expanded to meet a need he couldn't have anticipated, but would have readily embraced. Gregory's expression grew thoughtful. I've been listening to the presentations all morning. Dr. Chen's talk about capacity existing. On a spectrum, that's not how I thought about it a year ago. I saw it as a simple yes or no. Either you were competent or you weren't. That black and white thinking makes it easier to justify taking control from someone else, I observed. Reality is almost always more nuanced. We moved toward a quieter corner of the atrium, finding a small table away from the main flow of traffic. Gregory seemed to have something specific on his mind. The man who spoke just before lunch, the retired professor whose daughter liquidated his investments without permission. His story struck a chord with me, Gregory admitted. When he talked about how betrayed he felt, how it wasn't just about the money but about having his judgment dismissed by someone he trusted. I could see myself in his daughter's actions. His willingness to identify with the perpetrator rather than the victim showed a level of self-awareness that would have been unimaginable a year ago. Insight is the first step toward genuine change, I said. You can't address patterns you don't recognize in yourself. Gregory nodded slowly. I've been thinking about something Dr. Hoffman said in one of our early sessions, that my attempt to control your living situation wasn't just about the house or money. It was about power and my discomfort with the reversal of our traditional roles. It was the most psychologically astute observation I'd heard from my son in our entire healing journey. For decades, he had been the child and I, the authority figure. My aging and Walter's death had disrupted that familiar dynamic, creating uncertainty he had tried to resolve by asserting control rather than adapting to a new relationship model. That's insightful, I acknowledged. Families often struggle with those role transitions, even without financial pressures complicating matters. Catherine and I have been talking about how to handle things differently with her parents, Gregory continued. They're both showing early signs of needing more support, and I'm determined not to repeat the same patterns. We're exploring options that maintain their independence while addressing safety concerns. This practical application of lessons learned represented the most meaningful form of atonement, not just acknowledging past wrongs, but actively working to approach similar situations differently in the future. As the afternoon sessions were about to begin, Beatrice appeared at our table. They're ready for the panel discussion on family communication strategies, she informed me. You're moderating. Remember? I rose from my seat, preparing to return to the stage. Gregory stood as well, hesitating before asking, Would it be all right if I stay for the rest of the conference? I'd like to hear the afternoon sessions. Of course, I replied, touched by his continued interest. Everyone is welcome here. That's the whole point. As I made my way back to the auditorium, I reflected on the journey of the past year, from the shock of betrayal to the purposeful creation of something that might help others avoid similar experiences. Walter's protective measures had saved our home, but the foundation that bore his name was now building something far more valuable than physical property: a community dedicated to preserving dignity and autonomy for seniors like me. The panel. Discussion on family communication awaited, and as I took my place at the podium, I felt Walter's presence strongly, not as a ghost from the past, but as a continuing influence shaping a future neither of us could have foreseen, but both would have embraced. 18 months after Gregory's attempted guardianship scheme, I found myself in the one place I never expected to visit again: Willow Creek Senior Living. This time, however, I wasn't entering as a bewildered resident under false pretenses, but as the leader of a workshop for the facility's staff. The irony wasn't lost on me as I set up my presentation materials in the same community room where I had once sat through mind-numbing bingo sessions planning my escape. "We're so pleased you agreed to conduct this training, Mrs. Pearson," said Lisa Chen, Willow Creek's new resident advocacy coordinator, a position created in the wake of our foundation's efforts to improve accountability in senior living facilities. "Your perspective is invaluable to our staff." I smiled at the young woman's enthusiasm. In her late 30s with a background in social work, Lisa represented a new generation of senior care professionals focused on preserving autonomy rather than just ensuring safety. "I'm glad to be here, though I admit it feels rather surreal," I replied, glancing around the room that had been redecorated since my brief stay. The institutional beige walls now painted a warm sage green, the fluorescent lighting replaced with softer fixtures. "The changes you've made are impressive." "Physical environment affects dignity," Lisa explained. "We've been implementing changes based on resident feedback, a concept that seems obvious now but wasn't standard practice before." As staff members began filing in, nurses, aides, social workers, and administrative personnel, I noticed some familiar faces among them. Ashley, the young receptionist who had tried to prevent my departure, now wore a badge identifying her as resident rights advocate. She gave me a sheepish smile of recognition as she took a seat. Once everyone was settled, Lisa introduced me, with a directness I appreciated. "Many of you know Mrs. Pearson's story, as it was a catalyst for the procedural changes we've implemented over the past year. Today, she's here to help us better understand the experience of seniors facing potential loss of autonomy and how we can better serve as gatekeepers against exploitation." Standing before the 30-some staff members, I began with the story. They already knew. How my son had brought me to Willow Creek under false pretenses, how I discovered his plans to sell my home, and how I ultimately escaped with Beatrice's help. "But today," I continued, "I want to focus not on what went wrong in my case, but on how similar situations can be prevented through institutional vigilance and person-centered practices." For the next hour, we engaged in case studies and role-playing, exercises designed to help staff identify red flags in admission scenarios. The participants were more receptive than I had anticipated, many sharing their own observations of potentially coercive family dynamics they had witnessed in their careers. "The challenge," I explained as we concluded, "is balancing legitimate concerns about senior safety with respect for autonomy. The question shouldn't be, is this person competent to make all decisions? But rather, what support does this person need to continue making meaningful choices in their life?" After the workshop, Mrs. Keller invited me to join her for tea in her office, another surreal experience, given that our last interaction in this space had involved my negotiating my own release from the facility. "I owe you an apology," she said once we were seated. "I knew something wasn't right about your admission, but I defaulted to trusting your son's assessment over your clear statements of competence." Her frank acknowledgement was unexpected. "That institutional bias is exactly what we're working to change," I replied. Family members' concerns should be heard, but not automatically prioritized over the senior's own expressed wishes. Your foundation's advocacy has changed our approach significantly, Mrs. Keller admitted. We now require independent evaluations before accepting any residents whose capacity is in question, and we have protocols for regular reassessment of guardianship arrangements. As I left Willow Creek after the session, I felt a sense of completion, a circle closing. The place that had represented the beginning of my ordeal had now become part of the solution, a training ground for more respectful approaches to senior heart. That evening, I hosted a small dinner gathering at my home, a celebration marking 2 years since the Walter Pearson Memorial Foundation had expanded its mission to include elder advocacy. Victor was there, of course, along with Julian Martinez, Judge Hamada, and Beatrice. To my pleasant surprise, Gregory and Catherine had also accepted the invitation, bringing a level of family integration to the professional milestone. After dinner, as we gathered in the living room with coffee and the apple tart Catherine had brought, Victor raised his cup in a toast. To Walter, whose foresight protected not just Evelyn, but through the ripple effects of that protection, countless other seniors in our community. And to Evelyn, Beatrice added, who transformed personal betrayal into public advocacy. I felt a familiar tightness in my throat at their words. Even after 2 years of public speaking about my experience, I still found myself moved by these moments of recognition, not for my own sake, but for what they represented about our collective capacity to create meaningful change from painful circumstances. As conversation flowed around various aspects of our work, Julian's excitement about a new legal clinic opening in the neighboring county, Judge Hamada's efforts to reform guardianship procedures in family court, I noticed Gregory standing somewhat apart, examining the photographs on the mantelpiece. I joined him there, recognizing his focus on a particular image, the last family. Photo taken before Walter's illness, all 4 of us smiling at David and Catherine's wedding. I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately, Gregory said quietly, about what he would think of everything that's happened. It was a complex question with no simple answer. Walter had anticipated Gregory's financial opportunism and taken steps to protect me from it, but he had also built mechanisms for Gregory's eventual redemption into the trust structure, suggesting he believed growth and change were possible. I think he would be sad about what happened, I replied honestly, but proud of the healing work we've done since. He never gave up on you, even when he was clear-eyed about your weaknesses. Gregory nodded slowly. I've been meeting with the Foundation's financial advisor about establishing college funds for Emma and James that they can't access until they're 25. Structure without control. I think that's what Dad was trying to teach me all along. This evidence of genuine learning, applying the principles of Walter's trust design to his own financial planning for the next generation, moved me deeply. It suggested that Gregory was internalizing the values behind the structures rather than just complying with their requirements. Later, as guests began to depart, Catherine pulled me aside. "We have some news," she said with quiet excitement. "We've finally sold the house and found a smaller place just 3 blocks from here. We close next month." "That's wonderful," I replied, genuinely pleased. Their decision to downsize had proven more challenging than anticipated in a difficult real estate market, but the move represented an important step in their financial recovery plan. "Gregory insisted on a home within walking distance of you," Catherine added. "He said it was important for the children to be able to visit their grandmother easily, but I think it's as much for his benefit as theirs." After everyone had left, I sat alone in my living room, contemplating the subtle shifts in family dynamics that had occurred over the past 2 years. The relationship between Gregory and me would never return to what it had been before his betrayal. That innocent trust was irrevocably broken. But something new had emerged in its place, a more honest connection, stripped of illusions but potentially stronger for having survived its near destruction. My phone buzzed with a text from Beatrice. "Proud of you tonight. Walter would be too." Lunch tomorrow? I smiled at her steadfast presence in my life. The friend who had recognized danger when I couldn't see it myself, who had connected me with the resources I needed at my most vulnerable moment, who had stood beside me through rebuilding both my family relationships and my sense of purpose. Absolutely, I replied. So much to plan for year 3. Because that was the unexpected gift of this journey. At 78, when many of my peers were narrowing their horizons, mine had expanded. The work of the foundation continued to evolve, with new initiatives emerging as we identified gaps in protection for vulnerable seniors. What had begun as a response to personal betrayal had blossomed into a mission that gave meaning and structure to this chapter of my life. And as I prepared for bed in the home that Walter's foresight had preserved for me, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not despite the painful journey of the past 2 years, but because of it. Sometimes, it seemed, our deepest wounds lead us to our most important work, if we're brave enough to transform pain into purpose. 3 years to the day since I escaped from Willow Creek, I sat on the porch swing of my Victorian home, watching the autumn leaves dance across the lawn. At 80 years old, I found myself in a place of unexpected peace, not the quiet resignation often associated with advanced age, but an active tranquility born of purpose and reconciliation. The Walter Pearson Memorial Foundation had grown, beyond anything I could have imagined when we first expanded its mission. Our elder advocacy program now served 5 counties, with satellite offices staffed by dedicated professionals and volunteers. The annual Dignity and Autonomy Conference had become a nationally recognized event, drawing attendees from across the country seeking to implement similar protections in their own communities. A familiar silver Honda pulled into my driveway, and Beatrice emerged carrying a small gift bag. At 78, she moved more carefully these days, a cane assisting her on uneven terrain, but her eyes remained as sharp and lively as when she had first recognized the danger Gregory posed. 3 years ago? Happy Liberation Day, she called as she made her way up the walk, using the term we had coined for this anniversary. I smiled at her approach. Is that what we're calling it now? Better than the day Evelyn busted out of the nursing home, though that has a certain dramatic flair, she replied, settling beside me on the swing. We had developed a tradition of marking this day together, not with somber reflection, but with celebration of the unexpected positive outcomes that had emerged from that crisis. Beatrice handed me the gift bag, which contained a beautiful journal bound in soft leather. For the memoir, she explained. Victor says at least 3 publishers are interested. The memoir had been Julian's idea initially. Your personal story is what resonates most with people, he had argued during a foundation board meeting. A book could reach thousands more seniors and their families, helping them recognize warning signs and know their rights. I had resisted, at first, uncomfortable with further publicizing family matters that still felt tender. But Gregory himself had ultimately changed my mind. Write it, he had said during a quiet moment after Sunday dinner several months ago. The real story, not just what I did, but why, and what happened afterward. People need to understand that these situations aren't simple villains and victims. The sound of children's laughter interrupted my thoughts as Emma and James came, racing around the corner of the house, followed by Gregory and Catherine at a more sedate pace. At 14, Emma had blossomed into a thoughtful teenager with her late Uncle David's serious demeanor, while 11-year-old James remained exuberant and impulsive. "Grandma! Beatrice!" James called out. "We brought everything for the picnic!" Our Liberation Day celebration had evolved to include a family picnic in the backyard, weather permitting, with Emma and James fully aware of the day's significance, though the details had been shared in age-appropriate ways as they matured, too. "Me help with that," I offered as Gregory approached with a large basket. "I've got it, Mom," he replied, continuing toward the backyard. After moving into their new home just blocks away, Gregory and Catherine had become regular presences in my daily life. The careful distance that had characterized our early reconciliation had gradually given way to a new normal. Not erasing what had happened, but building something different atop that difficult foundation. As we settled around the picnic table Walter had built decades ago, I observed my small family with the perspective that only time and hard-won wisdom can provide. Catherine was telling Beatrice about her promotion at the library, where she now worked as community outreach coordinator. Emma was engrossed in a book, pausing occasionally to contribute to the conversation. James was attempting to balance a cookie on his nose, much to Gregory's amused disapproval. "I have some news," Gregory said as we finished our lunch. "It's official. The Small Business Administration approved my loan application. The home renovation company can finally launch next month." This venture represented the culmination of Gregory's financial rehabilitation process, a modest business focusing on retrofitting homes for aging residents who wish to remain independent, developed with guidance from the Trust's business mentorship program. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Gregory would now be helping seniors stay in their homes rather than removing them from them. "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "Walter would be proud of how you've redirected your skills." A comfortable silence followed, the kind of quiet moment families can share only when underlying tensions have been resolved. The journey to this peace had not been easy or straightforward. There had been setbacks along the way, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves when trust newly rebuilt seemed suddenly fragile again. But we had persisted, held accountable by the structures Walter had established, and the new connections formed in the aftermath of crisis. After the picnic, while Catherine took the children to their afternoon activities, Gregory lingered behind. He seemed contemplative as he helped me clear the remains of our meal. "I was thinking about something this morning," he said as we worked, "about how Dad used to say that our legacy isn't in our possessions, but in the integrity with which we live our lives." I nodded, remembering Walter's frequent repetition of that principle, one he had lived faithfully throughout our marriage. "For a long time, I completely missed his point," Gregory continued. "I thought legacy was about financial inheritance, what you leave behind materially. But watching what you've built with the foundation these past 3 years has helped me understand what he really meant." His words touched me deeply. Gregory's most meaningful atonement had not been the financial restitution, or even his consistent participation in family counseling, but this gradual, genuine internalization of Walter's values. "Your father was a wise man," I replied. Though even he couldn't have predicted how his protective measures would ultimately create such wide-reaching impact. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I sat at my desk reviewing the outline for the memoir that had been developing over recent months. The working title, Foresight, How My Husband Protected Me Long After He Was Gone, captured the heart of the story I wanted to tell. Not just about betrayal and elder exploitation, but about love that extends beyond death through careful planning and profound understanding of family dynamics. My phone rang, Victor calling with updates about the Foundation's newest initiative, a partnership with the State Bar Association to provide pro bono legal services to seniors facing guardianship proceedings. At 82, he had scaled back his private practice but remained deeply committed to our advocacy work. "The governor's office called today," he informed me with satisfaction. "They want you to serve on the Commission for Elder Justice Reform. It would mean monthly meetings in the Capitol, but they're prepared to accommodate your schedule." The invitation represented yet another unexpected door opening in what many would consider the twilight years of life. At 80, I found myself not winding down but continuing to expand into new areas of impact. "I'll need to think about it," I told him, though we both knew I would accept. The work had become too important, the mission too closely aligned with my own experience, to decline such an opportunity. After we hung up, I moved to the living room window that overlooked my front yard. The Victorian home that had become the focal point of such conflict now stood as a symbol of resilience, not just my personal determination to maintain independence, but Walter's loving foresight in creating structures that protected what mattered most. In the fading evening light, I could see Gregory and Catherine's house just visible a few blocks away, its porch light already glowing warmly against the gathering dusk. Beatrice's condo lay in the opposite direction, close enough for our regular walks when weather permitted. My world had simultaneously contracted and expanded, geographically more contained as mobility became more challenging with age, yet practically more influential through the foundation's growing reach. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself mentally addressing Walter as I often did in quiet moments. "You couldn't have known exactly what would happen," I told him silently. "But somehow you prepared for it anyway. Your legacy extends far beyond what either of us imagined." The betrayal that had once seemed like the tragic final chapter of my family story had instead become the catalyst for a new beginning, not just for me and Gregory, but for countless other seniors whose autonomy would be better protected because of what we had learned and shared. Walter's protective measures had saved our home, but the foundation that bore his name was now preserving something far more valuable: the dignity and self-determination of vulnerable elders throughout our state and beyond. My name is Evelyn Pearson, and at 80 years old, I have learned that our greatest challenges can become our most meaningful purpose when viewed through the lens of service to others. The wisdom of those we've lost sometimes protects us long after they're gone, but what we build from that protection becomes our own unique contribution to the world. As I drifted toward sleep in the home where I had raised my children, nursed my husband through his final illness, discovered my son's betrayal, and ultimately found a new purpose, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not an ending. There was still much work to be done. A memoir to write, a commission to serve on, grandchildren to guide. But a circle closing, a journey making sense of itself in retrospect. The house that Gregory had once secretly listed for sale now stood as headquarters for a movement. Its historic parlor converted to a meeting space where our foundation board gathered monthly. The home Walter and I had lovingly restored over 4 decades had become both personal sanctuary and public symbol of elder rights, a dual purpose that felt entirely fitting as the final chapter of its long history under our care. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But tonight, on the 3rd anniversary of what had seemed my darkest moment, I rested in the knowledge that sometimes our deepest wounds lead us to our most important work, and the wisdom of those we've lost continues to light the way forward, long after they're gone. 5 years after my escape from Willow Creek, I celebrated my 82nd birthday surrounded by a gathering that would have been unimaginable during those dark days. The garden of my Victorian home bloomed with early summer flowers as guests mingled on the lawn. Not just family and close friends, but colleagues from the foundation, members of the State Elder Justice Commission, and seniors whose lives had been touched by our advocacy work. "Speech, speech," called Julian Martinez, now the foundation's legal director at 31, his early idealism tempered but not diminished by years of courtroom battles on behalf of vulnerable elders. I made my way to the small podium Gregory had arranged near the venerable oak tree that had witnessed generations of our family's history. At 82, I moved more deliberately than I once had, aided by a decorative cane that Beatrice had given me. "Not because you need it," she had insisted, "but because it completes your distinguished advocate persona. Thank you all for coming today," I began, looking out at the faces of those who had become part of my extended family over these transformative years. When Walter and I bought this house nearly 60 years ago, we never imagined it would one day host gatherings like this, or that at 82, I would find myself at the center of a movement, rather than simply enjoying quiet retirement. Appreciative laughter rippled through the audience. My memoir, Foresight, A Family's Journey from Betrayal to Advocacy, had been published 6 months earlier, its unexpected success bringing national attention to issues of elder autonomy and financial exploitation. What had begun as a personal, story had resonated with thousands of readers who recognized the subtle patterns of disempowerment in their own families or communities. They say that life's most meaningful chapters are often the ones we never planned to write, I continued. 5 years ago today, when I discovered my son's attempt to have me declared incompetent, I could only see that moment as an ending. The tragic conclusion to what I had believed was a close family relationship built on trust and mutual respect. I glanced toward Gregory, who stood beside Catherine near the back of the gathering. He met my gaze steadily, no longer flinching from public acknowledgement of his past actions. His home renovation business had flourished, specializing in modifications that allowed seniors to age in place safely. The irony of this career path, helping elderly homeowners remain independent rather than displacing them, had become a powerful testimony to genuine change. What I couldn't see then was that endings often contain the seeds of new beginnings. The painful experience that might have left me bitter instead connected me with a purpose larger than myself and a community stronger than any I had known before. Beatrice sat in the front row, her health more fragile now at 83, but her spirit undimmed. Beside her was Judge Hamada, recently retired but still actively involved in mentoring young attorneys interested in elder law. Victor had passed away peacefully the previous winter, but his legal expertise lived on in the protocols and protections the Foundation had established throughout the state. When I look around today, I see the living legacy of what we've built together. The expanded Walter Pearson Memorial Foundation now serves seniors in 12 counties. Our legal clinic has prevented over 300 improper guardianships in the past year alone. The state legislature has adopted our recommended reforms for capacity evaluation protocols. Emma, now 16, stood proudly with the Foundation's youth advisory board she had helped establish. Teenagers dedicated to bridging generational gaps through storytelling projects that preserved seniors' histories while educating young people about ageism and elder rights. James, at 13, had developed his own niche within our work, using his natural charm and computer skills to help seniors navigate technology that could enhance their independence. But perhaps the most meaningful achievement isn't measured in statistics or legislative victories, I continued. It's the subtle shift in how we view aging in our community, not as a process of inevitable decline and diminished agency, but as a continuation of dignified selfhood deserving of respect and accommodation. The publication of my memoir had coincided with a documentary film chronicling our Foundation's work, bringing national media attention that had initially made me uncomfortable. Gregory had surprised me with his support during this public phase of our story, participating in interviews with remarkable candor about his own journey from exploiter to advocate. As some of you know, the governor's office has invited our foundation to help develop a statewide elder justice initiative based on our community model. This expansion will allow us to reach many more vulnerable seniors, particularly in rural areas where isolation often compounds the risk of exploitation. There was approving applause at this announcement. The previous year's appointment to the State Commission had opened doors I never anticipated, bringing me into conversations with policymakers and influential figures who could implement systemic protections for seniors far beyond our local community. This work continues to evolve in ways Walter could never have envisioned when he structured his estate to protect me from financial exploitation. His foresight created a foundation, both literally and figuratively, upon which we've built something that now extends far beyond our family's story. I looked toward the portion of the garden where we had installed a small memorial bench after Victor's passing, its plaque honoring both him and Walter as the architects of protection, whose wisdom had made all of this possible. As I begin my 83rd year, I find myself reflecting on something Walter often said during his illness. The measure of our lives isn't in how we face the expected challenges, but in how we respond to the unforeseen ones. None of us anticipated the journey that brought us here today, but I'm profoundly grateful for where it has led. The remainder of the afternoon passed in comfortable celebration, conversations flowing across generational and professional boundaries. I found myself in a quiet moment with Gregory as the gathering began to disperse, watching James demonstrate his latest computer game to several amused board members. "The governor asked about you specifically during yesterday's commission meeting," I told him. "They're interested in your perspective on housing modifications as part of the statewide Aging in Place initiative." Gregory looked genuinely surprised. "Me? I would have thought my history would make me the last person they'd want involved in elder policy." "On the contrary," I replied, "your journey from exploitation to advocacy gives you unique insight. You understand the thought patterns and justifications that lead to elder abuse in ways most professionals never will." He was quiet for a moment, absorbing this unexpected validation. "It's strange how things unfold, isn't it? Sometimes I still wake up amazed that the worst thing I ever did led to the most meaningful work I've ever done." "Transformation rarely follows a path we can anticipate," I observed, thinking of my own unexpected evolution from betrayed mother to public advocate. That evening, after the last guests had departed, I sat in Walter's study, a room that now served as the heart of my writing and advocacy work, its walls lined with books on elder law, aging, and family dynamics. Emma had helped me organize research materials for my second book, which would focus less on my personal story and more on practical strategies for families navigating the complex terrain of aging and autonomy. My phone chimed with a text from Beatrice. "Magnificent party. Walter would have been so proud. Rest tomorrow?" I smiled at her consistent care. Still my most devoted friend after all these years, still ensuring I didn't overextend myself despite my tendency to take on new projects with the enthusiasm of someone decades younger. "Absolutely," I replied. "Brunch at 11? As I prepared for bed in the home that had nearly been taken from me 5 years earlier, I felt the weight of accumulated wisdom, not as a burden, but as a ballast, steadying me through life's continuing challenges and opportunities. At 82, I had discovered that age brought not just the vulnerabilities that Gregory had once sought to exploit, but also perspectives and possibilities uniquely available to those who had witnessed the full spectrum of human behavior across decades. The Victorian house around me stood as both sanctuary and symbol, its rooms having witnessed my family's complete story, from young love to mature partnership, from betrayal to reconciliation, from private pain to public purpose. Walter's protective measures had preserved these walls when they were threatened, but it was what had happened within them afterward that had truly honored his memory and extended his legacy. Tomorrow would bring another commission meeting, another chapter to write, another seniors' crisis to address. But tonight, I rested in the knowledge that what had once seemed like my family's greatest failure had become the foundation of its most meaningful contribution, proof that even our darkest moments can contain the potential for unexpected light if we have the courage to transform them into something that serves beyond ourselves. My name is Evelyn Pearson, and at 82, I have learned that the story is never truly over as long as we remain open to its continuing evolution. The wisdom that protected me in crisis has rippled outward to protect countless others, and the legacy that matters most isn't preserved in property or possessions, but in the lives touched by our willingness to transform personal pain into public purpose. As I drifted toward sleep in the bedroom Walter and I had shared for nearly 50 years, I felt his presence in the continued unfolding of the story he had helped set in motion, not just through the legal structures he created, but through the values he instilled that continued to guide my path forward. Some legacies can't be measured in material terms or captured in legal documents. They live on in the choices we make and the lives we touch long after the original story seems to have reached its conclusion. The betrayal that had once threatened to define my final chapter had instead become merely the opening pages of a far more expansive narrative, one that continued to evolve in ways that honored the past while remaining open to the unexpected possibilities of the future. In that ongoing story, I had found not just purpose but a profound sense of peace, the kind that comes from knowing that even our deepest wounds can ultimately serve a healing far beyond ourselves. Up next, you've got two more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.